actually. I really,
What'd you say?
As someone who loves like music and like watching people create music, I just thought it was really fun to see the composer process. Like there were some videos where it actually showed you going through the entire process of well, of course they in those examples they used a few samples and stuff like that, but they showed you like how they would put together a score and how they would figure out what score is best for a particular scene. And I just thought the overall process was pretty cool.
Well, some people actually do use those things, like the digital composition or whatever. They
Oh no, I know.
compose it with digital assets that are already available. They just
No, I know. I'm
rearrange
just
them.
saying that will definitely, if people use that, that'll definitely make it a little faster. But there are some people that like to do it from scratch, that like to do their own thing completely, and you know.
Yeah, more expensively.
Yeah. Yes.
Let's start out with Tech Scout. So we already kind of went over Tech Scout. Like I said, we talked about this before. We went over the list that Studio Binder had. Basically, Tech Scout is just going to the location after you've picked it as a possible location for your shoot. You go back to it to work out all the technical details of that location to figure out if that's going to be, like, logistically speaking, if it's going to work for your shoot. What kind of lights will you use in that location? Where and how will the electricity be ran? Where are people going to park? All those kinds of logistical questions that you need to figure out will come up in this Tech Scout. And that's why you need to bring a lot of your crew, like the director of photography, the director, the gaffer, the producer, production manager, possibly the sound mixer if you can get them, the location manager, of course, a line producer, if you have it, visual effects supervisor, production designer, assistant director, stunt coordinator if you have it. A lot of these people need to come here to see the actual space because everybody's going to be looking at different things. Stunt coordinator is going to see where they know the stunts already, or they should. So if you have one, they'll know how much space they need, what space is going to work. If there's a wall in the way or if there's something in the way, they're going to notice that and say, hey, that's a safety issue for this stunt we're trying to do, or we don't have enough space for this. The production designer will see, okay, if we are shooting here, which areas are we going to shoot at? They're going to be with the director of photography and the director, seeing where, they had those shots, the shot list or the storyboard or whatever they had in their heads. But now that they're at the actual location, where are they going to get those shots? Is it going to be exactly the same as what they thought? How are they changing it? And they're going to be looking at that kind of stuff. So the production designer is going to see where they might need to set up and how they might set up. Is this going to need wallpaper? Is this going to need something on the ground? Is this going to need what kind of, is this somebody's room? Are we going to have to set up a whole entire room? Or is this in a location that already is a room and we're just going to kind of rearrange some stuff? Everybody needs to see their own perspective on everything in this actual location so they can see if it's going to work for what the production wants, what the director wanted in his vision that he's been explaining to everybody this whole time. So this is like one of the last things you do before you accept the location is you have this Tech Scout. It works out logistically and it works out creatively like you already thought it might. Then you lock that location down, or you do a Tech Scout at a few different locations and find the right one that's going to work the best and then lock it down. So that's what this is for. This thing isn't really related to Tech Scout. It's just kind of finding a location in general. Somebody gave a tip of if you are having trouble finding locations in your area or in the city that you want to shoot in, one thing they do is they go on Instagram and they hashtag the city that they're looking for. And because people are taking pictures all over the city and some of the coolest spots and different locations and unique places, you'll see a lot of different interesting looking places that you might find one that could work for your shoot just based on that. So that was just a tip they gave to look around for finding locations. And we've already gone over finding locations a lot with like the different websites and the different ways you can go about it. So I'm not going to go over all that again. But that was just one extra tip that I saw that was different from what I'd heard before.
No, it's good. It's appreciated.
Does anyone have any questions or comments on the Tech Scout?
Let's see. Just, I don't know. Like I remember being in film school, and our school was in Roslyn, Virginia. So like when we would go out to shoot, everybody, like the ones that really didn't put any much effort or any detail would usually shoot around the area of the school.
Mhm.
And because like, you know, it was our school, so we were there all the time. So like they would shoot in places I like, oh, I know where you shot that at. I know where you shot this at, because you know we eat there every day. So it just got kind of cliche and boring. And sometimes you get kind of like you get sick of seeing like the same location, the same, and it gets predictable and it gets annoying and it gets just, I don't know, it just gets boring. Um, so like just I guess where I'm getting at is just watch out for areas that are like
Used a lot.
used a lot, that too. And then also like keep in mind that like you're not gonna fool people a lot. I mean, you know, people aren't dumb. They're gonna know like if you shoot in this location in this house and then you stay in the same neighborhood and like I know we shot this one movie. I shot this one movie with well, I wasn't shooting it, but the cinematographer was like we shot outside exterior stuff, and then we were doing like these car scenes, but it was in the same neighborhood. Like he literally didn't put any effort into finding an area to shoot at. He was just like, oh, we can just shoot on the same street I live on, and then we just shot here. And it was like, you know, like at least try. You know what I mean? I think people
Yeah.
are gonna, hey, it's the same exact neighborhood. Like he was trying to play it off like, oh, we just drove to another city, and I'm like, no, you didn't. Like, and it doesn't look like you did either because we're still in the neighborhood. Like, you know what I mean? You're not gonna play it off like if your whole intent, oh, we're shooting in the city, but you live in the suburbs and all the roads that you shot on are, you know what I mean? People aren't dumb. You know, just put some kind of effort into, you know, finding the locations. I mean, you don't have to go all the way across the world to shoot your movie, but still at least try. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, and
Yeah,
I've
I
heard of
feel
like
like-
people using the same location for different parts because they look different. But if they look the same or if they're the same area, especially if you're shooting outdoors, like you said, and then you're pretending it's a different place, but you're still going to shoot outdoors, that's like obviously it's going to pass by that same area and it's going to look, you know,
Yeah.
locations look very different and unique because of how the houses look around that area, how the street is there potholes, what kind of color is the grass, or you know whatever's
I
around
feel
there,
like
the
that's
bushes.
why a good
trees.
location manager, a good person that's actually putting effort into finding a good location, they will take all these things into consideration. They will take into consideration what you need, what vibe you're going for, what tone you're going for, something that looks unique enough to where, you know, it can make your movie look good, but also not too unique to where it wouldn't match what you're going for, or it would stand out too much. Like they would take those things into consideration, and they wouldn't half-ass it, you know? Like,
Yeah.
that's how you know if this person's
Also,
Yeah.
putting effort into it or not.
oh well, take in consideration that not everything looks good on film.
Right.
So just have that
Yeah.
understanding. You know, everybody, oh man, you're a cinematographer, you should be able to make it look good. No, that's not always the
Oh
case.
my gosh. Yeah, no.
Everything looks good on film. So like I'll give you a good example. If you've noticed big Hollywood movies, like there's like a template. Like every house that in any movie you've seen, horror or whatever movie, like the house, I've never seen a split foyer in an actual production, like big Hollywood scale movies. So for those that don't know what a split foyer house is, it's the house where you walk in, the front door is there, and then you have an option to either go up or down. And like the house is divided into two different levels, and it's all like conjoined into one, but it's like you walk in the house and it's either you can go upstairs or downstairs, and it's right there. The foyer is literally the stairway upstairs or downstairs. The basement is considered the lower part of the house, but it's not really a basement. It's like another part of the house. So that, like, I've never seen a split foyer in a movie at all. And I can understand why. Not that they look bad or not that they are, it's just they're hard to film around because you have that split, that divide. So like whenever you do a door scene, you have like these stairs that are right there. Like normally in horror films or just in films in general, when you have a door scene, it's like you open the door, there's a stairwell to either the right or the left, and then you can see straight into the back into the kitchen. That's like in every movie. But like with the split foyer, it's like either you just have these stairs there, and we shot a movie with, and it was a split foyer, and that was like my biggest, I was like, oh, like, you know what I mean? Like, I was just like, I don't like this location. I don't like, you know what I mean? And then we shot this movie there, and then we ended up shooting another movie there, and I was arguing back and forth with the director. He's like, what's wrong with the house? I was like, we already shot there. He was like, so what? I was like, yeah, but I did so much work finding angles that work for that movie. I don't want to recycle the same shot. So I ended up having to use shots, you know, the shots I didn't go with the first movie, I ended up going with those shots for the second movie because I didn't want to recycle, you know, the shots, because we were shooting in this house that was just like hard to film, because like the living room was considered the kitchen. There was no walls, and like the bedroom was kind of like in the it was weird. It was just weird. Like, not just have to understand it, and not everything looks good on film, and that Hollywood does have like this template when it comes to certain things, like, you know, clothing, housing, all that stuff. Like, there's like a template that they follow through. Not saying that every house that you shoot in, you know, or that you shouldn't shoot in a split foyer, but just have an understanding that, like, if you just watch movies and pay attention to like the small details, like if you notice like all the houses are kind of like the same, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They go
Yeah, kind of like open floor plan.
You
with
know,
a
you
view
don't
or
want to
something.
fight.
Pretty wide open too. They're pretty big spaces.
Yeah, I just want to add in, like, you don't want to fight what works. Like, if Hollywood has like a system of like how things are kind of built, it's good to, you know, if you want to be creative, to add to that, but not like try to restructure, like recreate engineering. You know what I mean? It's just like, if you're engineering a house, like, you want to.
There's a reason they do it.
First, learn the way that they do it that way. Then once you know it inside and out, then you have a new idea. Be like, oh, well, now I'm going to engineer something a little bit more complex, but I completely understand the way that it's originally done. I completely agree with that. Like, if you don't even know how they do it the regular way, you can't just make up your own formula.
And I feel like that's
Right.
also why they recommend that so many people come along when you are scouting for the location, so that you can see if it looks good on film, so that you can see if it matches what the stunt coordinator, for example, if you need him, like the space for them to be able to fight, if it matches, if you're able to do, if the production designer is able to do something with that space, like what they're going for, like all of these things, it's important to know if they work in those multiple areas, not just in one area, not just for the DP, but also for everyone else that's going to need to utilize that area, that space.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's why, like she said, it's important to bring everybody so they're looking at it from their own perspective of what's going to work, what's not. That way, if it brought you to the location beforehand, I mean, you already had the conversation with him and he decided not to go ahead and shoot there anyway. But that could also be something that the director takes into account that he wasn't thinking of, and then goes, okay, fine, let's find somewhere else.
Well,
But
yeah,
it is ultimately up to the director to decide, like, whether they are going to say, well, we're just going to have to work with it, or if they're going to say, you're right, let's try something else, or let's go somewhere else for this.
he wasn't making decisions based off of, oh, this is what's best for the film. He was making decisions based off of, oh, this is my friend's house, and he said we can shoot it. We can shoot here for free, or we can get this Airbnb. Because that's originally what we were doing, and then last minute he was like, oh, I got this house.
So
and
in our case, we managed to get the location for free. Someone had offered it, but before that, we made sure, hey, can you send us a video of the location? Let's see if we can actually make the space work. Let's see what rooms, what part of this space we could utilize, if it's going to fit everything we needed to fit.
I mean,
Like,
because that
even
is
if-
something else to take into account, is budget.
Yeah.
And if he wasn't taking into account how much it would cost or whatever else, like, that is something else you have to think of. That's, producer has to think of that. If the director is the producer, that is something else they have to think of, that you have to, which is why they should also come along so they can see and just like compare prices and everything else. So there's a lot of different things going on, which is why you have these kind of conflicts and these things that need to be brought up. But then it's just ultimately decided by whoever's making the calls, whether it's the producer based on budget or the director based on what they like. Then it's just bite the bullet and go with it anyway, whether the production designer is saying it's not going to work as well or not. Then it's ultimately on them, the director and the producer for going with it anyway.
You never see townhouses in movies either. Now that I think about it, that's another one.
I'll be right back.
Well, that's probably because it's harder with. Like,
there are kind of smaller spaces for when you walk in, it's kind of a small area.
Not necessarily. Our living room's our kitchen's pretty big, which is stupid because there's no.
We don't have a townhouse.
Yeah, technically, what we have is a townhouse.
No, we don't have it though.
No, yeah, technically we have a townhouse. Just because it doesn't have stairs doesn't mean it's not a townhouse, apparently. Like, I looked it up. We have townhouses.
I would say no.
Apartment, but people, it's a townhouse.
Townhouse as in like the stairs are in the location itself. I would say. At least for filming wise, let's just say that. If it's technically not correct, who cares? But yeah.
Anyway, what I'm saying is there are townhouses that are bigger. Like, not all townhouses are smaller. The issue with townhouses is that you are very close to other houses. You are in a somewhat of a noisier area, not like super noisy like city, but like there are people coming and going all the time. And I can imagine it can be a lot harder for parking. It can be a lot, because here in our condo, there are like bigger places and smaller places, but you have designated parking and reserved parking.
They could all park on the street.
Yeah, but what street? Like, our street has
people park there all the time.
Yeah, but not that many. Like, depending on the size of a production, I can imagine if everyone has a car, it will be a lot harder. I'm just saying logistically.
Nah, it wouldn't be that hard. The street's pretty wrong.
Hours.
I'm just saying logistically they could all park on that street and it'd be fine. But what I was meaning is the stairway is, I think, the main thing with the like when you see stairways in the movies, it's always like that big wide open one where you can see the whole like you can see the rail, and it like maybe has that turn in the corner of the wall where it goes up the other side, where it's like wrapped around the whole building. You don't really see as much as like those little stairways where it's like you don't where the stairways where it has like a wall on each side.
But yeah, that's another thing. Like I mentioned, it's a template they go by, and they usually go like and have the understanding that a location also plays a huge part in the look of your film as well. Like, so if you're the script says a house, but what kind of house is it? Is it like an older house or newer house or a rustic house? Like, what kind of house are you going for? Because like if you're trying to give off like this horror, you really don't see like the new smart houses, all the stylistic, you don't see that in a lot of movies, like, or especially horror films. Like you see like these old art, whenever they do diner scenes, like if you notice like all the diner scenes they do are like, these old Denny's looking,
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's never really a scale high class. It's always like this trucker stop or whatever. But also, and keep in consideration when you're doing location scouting, it's the actual location that you're in. It may look good for the part, but if you're like shooting in like, so I'll give you a good example. So like when I was in film school, we were going over footage from one of my peers, and he showed me this footage. He's like, you want to check this out, right? And he was having a shootout. He was doing a scene with a shootout, right? And this was like in Southeast DC, which is like really rough. So like they were doing this scene, and the neighbors saw the guns, and the neighbors called the police. And he hit record, and it was him hiding behind a tree with a gun, and then his friends, the other actors, were on the other side of the street. And then you hear the sirens like all the way in the background, and it gets louder and louder and louder until you see like an actual cop car stop sign at the bottom of the street, and it makes this left turn, and it comes all the way down. The two cops get out of their car, guns drawn. They're like, stop, blah, blah, blah. And he drops again. And this is all on camera, like all in one shot. And like, keep in mind, like, I mean, like some neighborhoods, like, and I tell people, I'm like, yo, you have guns. Because he didn't want to, I guess he figured because, this type of stuff happens all the time, like, you'd be okay with it. But he didn't expect the police to actually show up, but people call police, and it doesn't even matter. You know, I've had the cops called on my crew. We didn't even have guns. You know what I mean? We didn't even have guns. They took it. They thought like they thought we were shooting porn or something like that. But I'm like, we have one female, and she's fully clothed. I don't understand. Like, people just want to call the police. Like, they see a camera, they see lights, and they just lose their mind.
And that's what I meant about the townhouse thing. There's a lot of people there, and they see people coming in with cameras and shooting and stuff. So I can understand that it can be a lot more annoying than in a more secluded area.
True, I will give you that. I've also
Thank you.
Too. And we went door to door, knocked on people's houses, like, hey, we're shooting a movie, blah blah blah. And then we go, and it was like in this wooded area that we were shooting in, and we still the fire department still showed up, and we were like, oh my god, like, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter. The most safest thing you can do is just to get permits and just stay. So if the police are called on you, like, you can just shoot them away. But it's still gonna take some time, because they actually got to go through it and, like, what do you call it? Make sure it's real, authentified, you know, all that stuff. So,
yeah, authenticated and everything. Make sure you're not lying, made a fake permit.
Yeah, I mean,
Why would
a
you?
lot of city cops are pretty chill about it. They're like, oh, you got permits, all right, let's go. But if they're like in a suburban area, then they got to go through the process. Yeah, so it can get frustrating, it can get annoying, but it will take a lot of time out of your set, because they're sitting there like calling back and forth. It's like, oh my, because you know how long it takes them to give you a speeding ticket. Like, they don't just give you the ticket and have you about your day. They like sit there and like give you a full background check, and it takes like a good 30 minutes for them to write the ticket.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the same thing. But
especially if you're trying to film at a certain time of day, and then your whole day's going by and the sun's going down and whatever else.
yeah, people are just nosy, and yeah, it's just frustrating. So that's one thing. Keep in mind where you're at, what kind of neighborhood you're in, and all that stuff. So we actually shot another movie, which was surprising. We shot another horror movie in the woods. We were doing like some dead body stuff, and people kept walking by. You know, we were in the woods, but there was also like this jogging path and a biker trail through there too. So like, we kept getting people coming through there. Hey, what are you guys doing? Oh, you're shooting a movie, blah blah blah. But
Well,
like,
that makes me feel better about humanity. Because can you imagine if you weren't, and people were just like, I'm not getting involved.
yeah, I was like, somebody's gonna call the cops. Somebody's gonna call. No one. Else. Like, call the police.
Yeah.
No. Sometimes, this is an anecdote, so I'll state it after the meeting. But yeah, I was just thinking about. I'll tell you later. Keep going.
All right. Well, does anyone else have any comments or questions about Tech Scout location stuff in general? All right, let's move on.
Woohoo!
To film composers. So first thing that people were talking about, it was a composer, and he was making some videos, and he was talking about how to communicate with a composer if you're going to get one, because he sees a lot of like people who haven't worked with composers before. They try to communicate with him and tell him what they want, but it's very unclear, and it's very hard to tell what they're actually going for by the way they word it. When communicating with a composer, he says, try not to use generic terms or phrases like uplifting or less is more, or I want you to think outside of the box, because those can mean so many things. They're subjective. One person's less is another person's more. Something that's uplifting can mean so many different variations on that same kind of feeling. So he was saying, like, don't use very generic terms, because it's going to be impossible for that composer to get exactly what you want, or even get close to what you want most of the time, just based on something like that, especially something like think outside the box. What exactly does that even mean? So he's saying, like, in the same way you're directing your actors and you have to like learn how to communicate with them, you need to learn how to communicate with your composer to get the music you want, the same way you wanted to get the performance you wanted from the actors. He said, use examples you both know. Examples of films or other works can help clarify the kind of sound you're thinking of. Then you can both delve into why you want that kind of music and what you like about it. So let's say you wanted something like, I want it to sound sort of like Gladiator's theme in this moment of the movie. And you both know what you're saying. You both know what you're talking about. You know exactly that kind of theme. You don't want it to be a ripoff or like a generic, cheap version of that. So that's when you start getting into the conversation of, well, what do you like about that? What did you like about it? What instruments stood out to you the most? Was it the speed of it? Was it the tempo? Was it when they did this or that? Or was it when the string instruments came in? Was it the constant beating of the drums? Like, you know, what did you like about it the most? And then you can start like delving into why that worked and what you want from that kind of sound to go into your own project. He also said to avoid examples where the context is where the music comes from instead of the music itself. Because when the composer makes a similar sounding piece, it's not going to have that same context as the original. He is the example of like using Nutcracker, the sound, what is it called? The music from the Nutcracker in like a certain part of your project to try to make it seem funny because, oh, it's from the Nutcracker. But because, you know, you can't actually have that music and you're just going to have something similar sounding, it's not going to work the same way. It's not going to feel that same way. It's not going to have the context of coming from the Nutcracker. It's going to have just the context of it's going to sound like, you know, that kind of music, like a Christmas.
Another thing that they said is like, if you say, oh, I want something that sounds like this, like this specific composer, this specific movie, or this specific song, they will keep, a lot of people might just keep that in their minds and try to make it sound way too much like that as well.
Yeah, which would be like a cheap knockoff, which is not going to make it sound good. You want to have something, so it can have similar sounds and similar themes, but you want it to be original to your own project so that people aren't like, oh, wow, they're trying to do like my example earlier. Like, you don't want people to think, oh, wow, they're trying to do Gladiator, or this is a Gladiator ripoff, or, you know, this is like a cheap version of that. You want them to think that it's cool sounding music that goes with your project, without completely connecting it to something else. So that's another reason you don't want to really use a song that comes from somewhere else. You don't want it to be exactly the same. So he said, like, instead of saying like, I want it to sound like the Nutcracker to be funny, because then people are thinking about the Nutcracker, but the scene is more serious, so that makes it funny. He said, just avoid that entirely and try to come up with something else that might work, because that's not going to work. You know, it's not going to be the same song. It's not the licensed material, so it's not going to have the same context. Now the music sounds like it's similar to the Nutcracker, but it doesn't actually come from the Nutcracker. So it's not going to have that same feel. It's not going to have that same thing you're going for originally. He said, definitely avoid, I'll know it when I hear it. Better to be completely honest and say, I don't know. I honestly have no idea where to start. Can you help me? And then you can work on how to come about what kind of music you want, instead of just saying, hey, work on a few things and I'll know what I want when I hear it. Because again, that's going to be so broad and so hard to comprehend and hard to get right, because there's so much different kinds of music. Well, that could be strings, that could be drums, that could be, you know, very brooding, dark music, that could be very high tempo and light. It could be all sorts of different things. So you can't just say, I'll know when I hear it, because how are they going to know what you're going for or what you're even intending? It's going to be so many different things they can do, and it's going to waste a lot of time. So instead, being like, I don't know what I want. Can you help me work through it? And then you can kind of talk about what the film is like, and the composer wants to get what you want. They want to get what the director wants, so that when they make that final piece, or when they make their first, you know, they spend all that time creating it, the director will like it and maybe have some adjustments or some tweaks needed, but not be like, scrap that whole thing and let's start over, because then that's a lot of their time and their effort gone to waste. They want to get it right. They want to get it how he wants, so that they can be proud of it and the director can be proud of it, and like working with them. So they want to work with you if you're the director and you're trying to get the sound. They want to work with you to figure out what you want, even if you don't initially know from the get-go. Another thing he said is if you don't know where to start, you can start by ruling things out. Do you want heavy metal? No, probably not. So you can just kick that out. Now go through a list of other things. What do you not want? Do you like this kind of instrument? Do you like that kind of instrument? Do you not like this? And then just start kicking things out. And then eventually you'll start creating a kind of like a circle of things that could work because you've kicked out so many other things that definitely aren't going to work. And that can narrow it down a lot so that you at least have somewhere to start, a better basis than just do it and I'll hear it and I'll tell you when I like it. They also said when you're trying to do music, you want to not focus so much on what the music sounds like itself, but more on what the role of the music is in the project. Something like you want to, a brooding tune throughout the whole thing, or even in the boring moments, it feels like something could happen. And that'll be more clear on what you're wanting in that film, and that you want there to feel like there's like a constant fear or a constant what if, or something could happen right now at any moment, even in the parts where it's just someone picking up a can of beans at the grocery store. And that'll give them a better idea of what you're looking for, what you're going for, instead of just saying like, I want it to sound dark, because that's not as clear. It's not as easy to comprehend. He also said hating instruments is okay. You just want to mention it right off the bat so that your composer doesn't write a score with that kind of instrument for you to say you hate it. So if you hate if you hate a trumpet, you hate how the trumpets sound, just let them know right away so that they don't come to you with this score, because you guys have discussed this thing for so long, but you never said you hated trumpets. And now you come to them, or they come to you with their first draft of what they think might sound good for the project. And you're like, oh, that has a lot of trumpets in it. I don't like that at all. And then they have to readjust everything because maybe trumpets was one of the biggest parts of that score. Maybe it played a vital role in whatever they wrote. And so you just want to let them know right off the bat if you're going to not want anything in there. If you hate anything, if you really don't like the way this kind of instrument sounds or that kind of thing, that way they know to at least never put that in. Or if they do, they put it in very, very subtly or something like that, so that you might not even notice it. But they probably wouldn't put it in at all if you say you hate it. To get to the point where you kind of know what you're looking for, you also, the first thing you should do is sit with your producer, the director, and the composer and do what's called a spotting session, to where you can watch the film and spot where the music needs to be. Not every project is going to need, I'm going to mute you, Brian. You're kind of making some muffled noises right now. You can unmute yourself later if you want to talk. So a spotting session is where you watch the film and you spot where music needs to be, as well as what kind of like tone and what kind of music you might want. So you sit with the composer, producer, and director, and you kind of go through it. In this moment, it's more serious, it's more sad, it's more this, it's more that. Go through the emotions and you figure out, does there even need to be music here? And if there does need to be music here, what kind? Because not every film needs to have music going throughout the entire thing. Sometimes silence works better than music. Sometimes it doesn't. So you just have to kind of watch the film and figure out where and when, or if you want a soundtrack going throughout the entire thing, that's something you need to figure out as well. So watching that film with the composer and the producer is a good way to figure out exactly what you're going to want. Another thing they said is to actually find a composer for your project. You can use something like what's called SoundCloud. And you can search like a hashtag film or hashtag film score or something similar to
He
that.
said something called SoundCloud. You can assume he's never heard of SoundCloud before.
I don't use SoundCloud. I don't know.
That is just funny the way you said it. It's like it was this weird concept.
Something called SoundCloud, like the website SoundCloud. to find different composers' works that match what you're looking for, so you can like get a predetermined judgment of what will work, what won't, because different composers are going to have different kinds of sound. Their music's not going to sound exactly the same, even if they're using the same instruments. All these composers are going to make something different with those instruments because that's what their job is, and they all have their unique spin on things. So hearing what they've made or hearing like other soundtracks they've done is a good way to kind of weed out some people and figure out what you might, maybe even if you're not even picking somebody from what you've researched, you're not even trying to like find somebody, maybe you're just trying to find a similar sound. And so at least you can find that using something like SoundCloud to find the music that you're looking for and be like, yeah, this is something similar to what I was thinking, something along these lines, for whatever composer you find. Or you might find you really love this composer's work, you love his sound, and it's going to match exactly to your film, and you can reach out to them on the website and try to get in contact with them to see if they're interested in working with you on your project. Another way to find composers is word of mouth. You can ask other filmmakers. If you've watched other filmmakers' projects, like independent projects or something like that, you can see the music they have on theirs. And if you like it, you can ask them like, hey, where did you find, what did you use to find your composer, or who is your composer? Or, you can figure out where they got their music from or who made it for them. So you can either get in contact with them or use their same resource to find a composer for your own project. And that's a big thing. They say, like, that's why, just like with everything else in filmmaking, it's very much about who you know and making those contacts and connections. And so once a composer's done good on a job, and other people like it, they'll reach out to that person and say, hey, who is your composer? Who made that? And then they can reach out to them themselves. And that's how composers get a lot of their work. If you want to start creating your own compositions, or you just want to start messing around to see what you can make, some of the more popular DAWs, I don't know exactly what their term is for it, but digital audio workstations are FL Studio, Avid Pro Tools, Apple Logic Pro X, Magix Acid Pro, Ableton Live, and Presonus Studio One. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but if you're just trying to like mess around and see if you can make something with music, there's also like free versions of those. Some of the free versions are GarageBand, Pro Tools First, Audacity, Ableton Live Lite, Traction Waveform Free, and Studio One Prime. So if you're trying to make your own compositions or just kind of see how it works and kind of edit around, those are some options to kind of get obviously the free versions are like a lesser version of the pro ones. They have like less tools and less resources, but they are a good way to kind of get a sense of how it works and to start getting into it if you're interested in trying to make your own music for your projects. There's also film websites, film school websites that usually have their own tabs that are dedicated directly for composers and like matching composers to upcoming directors, and student directors with student composers, and student composers with other people outside of school that are already graduated and are actually in the industry, so that they can show off their work and try to get them their own work. So you can go to a lot of different film school websites, and you'll find somewhere on their website will be a tab or something that'll be dedicated to their composers list and their student work and what they've done at the school and what their sound is like. USC has a great composer school. It's a great composer school with their website that shows off different students' works. You can also find people by just watching films at festivals, writing down the composer's name, stay for the credits, and see what you liked about it. That's what the credits are for, so you can get in contact with them. You can look up their name, and you'll usually find people who are interested in anyone who's interested in doing film work, they're going to have some kind of website most of the time, or some way to get in contact with them. So if you just look up their name, you'll probably find them pretty quickly. And then you can get in contact with them. Hey, I liked your music on this production and this movie or this short project. Would you be interested in working with me? That kind of thing. And then there's also Facebook groups for composers. I'm sure there's like Reddit and other social media that have dedicated groups for composers as well. So you can always look on those. Other resources for finding composers include ASCAP, ASCAP, Jingle Houses, NYU's website, and then of course other film schools, like I said. And that way you can find a lot of different people. You can get in contact with them and just see what you want. And most of them are going to have their work shown off somewhere online to where you can already weed them out if you don't like what you're hearing. All right, so back to talking about actually talking to a composer. Don't try to talk music with them. Talk in terms of emotion, feeling, and etc. It might be helpful to walk them through the subtext you gave the actors during rehearsal, because music it can be very emotional. It ties to what's going on with the characters or with the scene in general. So it's often a good time to kind of explain the same kind of process that you explained to the actors or that you explained to the director of photography and how you want the shots and why for the story to flow. And story is a huge component of composing. And there's a story within each composition itself. With good composers, they have a story that flows through the movie and connects it together or detaches it from each other if there's different locations. And so telling the composer stuff in terms of story, this is the most heartbreaking moment of her life. She just lost her child and this and that and that. And so this is very emotional for her and she's struggling to hold it together. A composer will do great things with that compared to being like, I want it to be a, I don't know, honey. Tell me some music terms.
What?
Music terms. I want the tempo to be a little lower. I want there to be. I
want it to be more
maybe
minor.
Maybe we do a middle C chord here, and when we do this, that don't try to talk to them in that way because it really hinders the creativity.
Mm-hmm. And also it's just nitpicking at that point, because at the end of the day, you're still not explaining what you want. You're just saying like, oh, this note isn't what I envisioned, or this note doesn't match, or blah, blah, blah. You're not being specific to like, okay, this is what I'm going for. This is the emotion, the tone, or maybe I need a melody that makes you feel more this. Like at the end of the day, that one note isn't, even if you don't like it, it isn't the issue. It isn't the main issue. It isn't the major thing. It isn't the problem. It might be part of the problem, but it isn't the problem. Not when it comes to the score, at least. If you're looking at the score and trying to get an emotion across, that's the main thing you need to be focusing on, not each individual note.
Yeah. And the score is very intertwined with the emotion of the film in general. So
now one thing
they said is like, if they do come back with a score and it's not exactly what you want, you don't have to say, you don't have to be so cryptic with how you're saying it. You can say, I don't know, this part right here, it's not working. You don't want to say like up the tempo here or lower the tempo there, or maybe do this kind of note or that kind of note. But you do want to point out the parts that you think aren't working as well. Like it's not as heartbreaking as I feel like it should be in this moment, blah, 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 blah. And then that way they can go back and kind of adjust what they've done.
And it's also okay for you to not know what you want at that time, because music is something that sometimes you have to mull over it. You might not see it at first, and you have to listen to it over and over again and listen to it in the scene, and see if it matches. and it might change for you. Like upon a first listen, you might not get it, and then once you see it again, you're like, you know what? Yeah, it does work. Sometimes when it comes to music, it's a lot about the mindset you're at as well, and where your mind is at, in order for you to see if that emotion matches or not. So, and sometimes you just don't know how to explain what you're feeling or what you want in it. So it's okay for you to be like, you know what? Can I get back to you in 24 hours? Can I listen to this? Can you send it to me? And I'll listen to it throughout the day, and I'll get back to you with what I might have liked or disliked about it, or why I think it might not work. It's okay to be honest, because
You're gonna have them stewing in their they're gonna be stewing in their head for a day.
That's what you need.
I know. I'm just saying, it'll be kind of like, I would be like freaking out because I'm like, oh, they hated it. They're trying to tell me how.
No, but at the end of the day, as long as you make it clear, like, listen, like, I appreciate I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just trying to make sure that it's what I'm going for. It's the best thing for the project. And I feel like my mind, I might need a little time to mull it over, be honest. Because sometimes you don't see it at first, and that's okay. So, and at the end of the day, you are all trying to make the best project you can make. And that's the main thing. So you're working together as a team. And if you need that extra time, fine. As long as you're paying him, I think he's going to be okay. Like, he's going to be a little nervous. He's going to be like, crap. And you can say, like, if you'd like, you can work on something else in between, but just give me a few hours, maybe. Just give me a little time. Because sometimes you might not know in the moment. I'm not saying do that every time, obviously. Don't be like, oh, I'm going to need every time, like 24 hours. No, if you know it, you know it. But sometimes you're like, your brain's all over the place and you're busy that day and you're like listening to it and you're not in it. Sometimes that happens. Or sometimes you are not sure exactly of what you don't like about it, and you don't know how to explain it, and you don't want to go through this whole thing of like, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, and be like, you know what, there's something in here that is not quite working for me, and I don't know what it is, and I don't want to waste your time, so just give me a couple hours, let me listen to it again. Or maybe in the session say like, hey, can you play that again, let me try, and while it's playing, let me try to think of what might be working or what might not be working. Put some thought into it. Just don't be afraid to, don't be nitpicky, but also don't be afraid to say, you know what, this is not it, and think about why. Don't just think about, oh, the this or that. Don't try to be too specific, but try to be, I'm horrible at wording things. And that's exactly, I would be the kind of person that I'd be like, I need a minute. But try to truly think about, okay, this is the emotion I'm going for. This is the scene. What is this not capturing the emotion I'm going for? Just truly delve into it while you listen to it, and look at the scene, listen to the music, and see if they meld together, because that's something that we read as well that was really important. Like the music, it needs to flow with the scene. It can't stand out too much to the point where it's like not making sense. I don't know if you guys have ever watched teen dramas. Probably, this is more of a girl thing, I don't know, but you watch it, and I remember specifically the Vampire Diaries did this a lot, where you would have a scene of something emotional happening, and you would have like a super obvious song in the background that was like, someone's burning to death, and it's like, I'm burning up, or whatever the crap in the background, and you're just like, oh, okay, and it takes you out of it, and it's kind of cheesy, and it's kind of, and it doesn't match. Like,
well, that's not composing, that's
no, I know, I'm giving an example, I'm using it as an example. So sometimes the melody will sound cool or will be a similar emotion to what you want, like, oh, you want a sad melody, but it still won't capture that specific tone that specific emotion. It'll be the right tone, but it won't be exactly what you're going for. Does that make sense? Me and Coda, when we were looking for,
yeah, it's definitely hard to like get it across. Like getting exactly what you want across is extremely difficult
Me and Coda were
because
from-
you already have it in your head of what you're looking for, and they don't know it, so they don't know what you're looking for in your head, but you have it, and you're like, I know what I want.
I feel like a better
Sometimes you don't have any clue what you want.
I feel like a better example is like me and you when we were looking for melodies to match the tone we were going for the lookbook for the short film. It was super hard because we found stuff that was like suspenseful or stuff that was like thriller-esque or whatever, but it didn't quite match what we wanted to. It was either too much or too little or too subtle or not subtle enough. And it was hard because it's like, this shouldn't be this hard because it's supposed to be just a basic interrogation. But at the end of the day, it's a lot more than that. And it was hard to find that specific thing we were going for. Yet we kept listening to song after song after song and we couldn't find it yet. Still haven't found it yet. So that's I guess a better example, I suppose.
I guess. I mean, it's just hard to get it to come across because music is so vast and comprehensive and everything. So it's hard to narrow it down to exactly what you're looking for. Especially because each piece is so, if you're getting a composer, then they can create the music for your project. And that's why I think it's harder to find it when you don't have a composer and you're just trying to find something that's already made because it wasn't made for that specific project. It wasn't made for that emotion that's happening in the film, and it wasn't made for those moments. So finding a composer, if you can get one, if you're able to, and you have the resources for it and everything, having a composer to work with to explain the emotion of the film and for them to come back and have something that matches the beats of the film is something that's really good, and why it works so well and why so many people do it, because just getting any random song, it doesn't always work. Just getting any random piece of music, it doesn't always work. It depends on what you're going for. If there's something happening, you want the beats to be in sync with the beats in the movie. You know, they're feeling very, very depressed right here, and then they start feeling a little more uplifting when somebody else calls out to them and they've realized that what they just thought is something completely different because that person, you know, maybe they thought that somebody was dead, and so they're feeling at their worst and their lowest, but then at that last moment they start coughing and they're coming alive. Well, the performance of the scene is going to determine when those beats of music, when it starts getting more inspirational, when it starts getting more depressing, it's going to follow the flow of that performance in that edited scene. That isn't going to be exactly the same beats as anything else, even though those kinds of scenes have been in a lot of films, have been in a lot of TV shows. The beat, the performance, how long it takes, where it's dragged out, what they're feeling in that moment, how much they're feeling in that moment. Those are all different for each story and for each character. And so having a composition that matches it just really work. That's why it's done. It's because it works so well. It matches exactly, and it goes in sync with that film.
That's smart and it's awesome. It all comes together and it's wicked.
Yeah, it's really cool when you see it all come together like that, especially when it just works so well.
Yeah, I noticed and where I've had thoughts like this isn't that would never work, and then I'm like, oh, actually, I just didn't understand these things. And I'm like,
right.
Oh,
yeah, and that's the same thing. Like if you're getting a composer, especially for me, I don't know much about musical theory. I don't know that much about it. So coming to a composer and trying to get them to understand what I want for the film would be a lot more difficult because I don't really know their language that well. I don't know musical language. I don't know musical theory.
And no,
but I can just give the emotion of the film so that they can come back with something, and then I can piece it together or pick apart what works, what doesn't. And I can explain oh yeah, I really like what you've done here. This part, it's not working as well. I think there's something we need to find, that there's something in here that isn't working, but these parts or this area is working completely the way I was better than I expected, more than I hoped.
I feel like it really depends, because if you do know musical theory, you might get way too caught up in the little details and the little nitpicks as well. So I feel like it really depends on who you are and and how you explain things.
And how much musical theory.
Yeah, because I feel like I know some musical theory, but at the end of the day, I I don't know enough to where I can like have a full on detailed conversation with someone, but I feel like as if I were a composer and someone was going detailed into like, okay, now this up, now this down, now this blah blah blah, I would be kind of like a little annoyed, because at the end of the day, you're not specifying what you want out of the scene. You're just telling me how to do my job. And why don't you do it? Why don't you compose it? If you know exactly the tone you want, the harmonies you want, the notes you want, then you do it. I don't know, like that might just be frustration on my part. But I feel like if you hired someone to compose a melody for you, it's because you like their work. It's because you trust them to come up with a melody that works for you. And if you're micromanaging every single note, I feel like you're not letting them do their job.
No, what I say is let them do the job and then come in after with a with a fine tooth and comb. So it's just like, let somebody do what they're gonna do off the top. Like, it's the same thing as an acting scene. Let the actor come in with their ideas, let them do what they want, and then work with them.
Adjust as necessary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Same thing for music. It's just like, okay, well, we like this, we like that. Let's adjust this, let's adjust that. Most of the time people are pretty easy, like can take I don't know, like work with you on that kind of things. Occasionally, like there's been periods in my life where it can be difficult, and at that point you just have to like make choices to like be like,
Yeah.
Right.
Whatever. It's interesting. Well,
Yeah, and I've heard like different composers, like especially in video games, I've seen like some behind the scenes stuff of their music, and like sometimes the director of the project will just say like, I want something that is, you know, kind of gothic but also futuristic and this, and then they just go okay, and they go away and they come back with something like Halo, and it's like they just took a few different things, like little tiny key pieces of information, and came back with that whole entire
Because they've
composition.
studied music, so they study musical theory. They study like a big part of music is also understanding the psychology of music and what
Effect it
notes
has.
yes, and also different notes and different like a minor and a major, they will evoke different emotions, and they will emote different layers to the piece. So at the end of the day, they studied that, so they know how to get that or they should know how to get that emotion across. And so when you give them the emotion, sometimes it's easier than giving them the theory. It can depend, because some musicians are more technical and some are more emotional. But at the end of the day, for a composer, if you're asking for a composer,
For
I
film,
feel like
I think if it's just another project, it might be different. But I think for film or for like, you know,
for video games, for shows, I feel like it's a
well,
lot.
for video games, it's kind of different. Like I'm saying, so for film, it is way more about the story than anything else. Video games can be about the level, the area, or just the general feel. But the for a film, it really is about what is happening in that scene, and that's that story element. And sometimes it is a different area, so you do want it to sound different than the area you were before, so that it's very clear it's somewhere else. But you still want it to follow that story and that flow and that character interaction.
It's definitely. I agree with that. Music is cool.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. I feel like at the end of the day, it's a lot easier and a lot better, in my opinion. I'm not a composer, but from what I've seen of other composers talking about it, it is a lot more helpful for you to talk about the emotion than for you to go deep into musical theory and that kind of thing.
Right. If nothing else, you can always just kind of go deep into the story itself and the emotions that the characters are feeling, like I was saying, like how you would do with an actor. That way the composer will know how to translate that into music. It might not be the exact kind of music that you wanted, but they'll at least get it around that ballpark, so you can start adjusting it as necessary.
That's also why it's important for you to know the composer's previous work and know if they are if it's the kind of thing you're looking for, because different composers gravitate towards different kinds of music, and gravitate towards different tones and different, some people, some composers like more grandiose music, others are more like emotional, low-key type of background, and so it really depends on what that composer's specialty is, what he likes to do the most, what he's better at. So knowing their previous work is really important.
And also seeing if they have versatility. Because, sometimes some projects will say, like Priscilla just mentioned, some projects will be, they don't want the music to stand out. They don't want it to be in the forefront. They want it to be very background and not really like just kind of there to have something going on without making the scene boring. But then other projects will want it to be the forefront of the scene. Lord of the Rings, a lot of their opening scenes for each location, the music was very vital for the scene, because it was like, that's all that was going on, was that and some landscape shots of the area. And Star Wars, the opening scene, the opening crawl of the thing, that the music was standing out completely in that. But then in other parts of the movie, the music's very background because it's not the forefront. So it also has to do with their versatility. Are they able to work in those things? What does your film want? Do you want this music to be forefront? Do you want it to be very stand out for different parts of the film at all? Is it going to stand out anywhere? Or do you just want it to be background so that it's not as boring and quiet?
Because not even boring. Sometimes having the background music helps you get that emotion across in a subconscious way. Like, how many times, I can't tell you how many times I've seen a scene and over again, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's music in that background. I can barely hear it, but it helps with the emotion that they're trying to evoke. So sometimes the emotion will be, the melody will be so quiet and subtle, but it helps get that emotion across. Or sometimes you'll hear a song, it's like, oh, that's nice. And you notice that, oh, it's been playing the whole time. And now it just went up in tempo, and you hear it and you're like, oh, that's been playing the whole time. And that's helped get the emotion of the scene across. It's not even to be boring, but it's to get the emotion out. And it's so subtle that it just helps with, psychologically, and you sometimes notice it, sometimes don't.
And VS was just wondering that with previous work, would it be best to have someone with experience in film versus video games if hiring for film, or should we be more open-minded? I would say it depends on what the video game is. There's some video games where you can see that there's like, it's very story. It relies on its story very much. And so like if it has music going in those moments, it's kind of the same thing as film. It's like an animated cinematic film. But if it's just like a level design music, I would assume that composer wouldn't be as used to working with film. It would be a lot harder to get them to that same place since they haven't really done it before. They could be great at making level design music, but that's very different than making an emotional beat that kind of connects or detaches the different elements of the film. If you want it to either connect, or you want it to be feeling different from the beginning to end, or if you want it to be like a fluid story that goes, that's very different than just kind of level design music. So it really depends on what kind of video games they've worked on. I would assume, and I would say that hiring someone who's worked on films, that they've worked on films and that they know the process. But for somebody who's only worked on video game music, especially if it's level design, where it's just like an overlaying sound of that area in the game, that I would assume that would be very different, and it'd be a bit harder to get them to get to the same place that someone who's worked on films would, because the process would be different.
Yeah, because there are a lot of games that are very story driven and are very like the song is a big emotional drive. It's not just there to look cool or to give or to make you feel like you're epic in an epic game or whatever. And then there are other games that it's a mix of the two. That's mostly our experience because we really like RPG. So we have a lot of video games that we play that have a mix of the two. They have like songs that are very emotional moments, and you're just like, wow, that's so like it gives you the feels. And then there are some that are just grandiose and cool for the battle scenes. And then there are other games that are just for the battle scenes or just to give the like basic emotions across. So it really depends on what kind of games they've worked for, and at the end of the day, their portfolio, like what they're experienced in, what kind of emotion that their music gives out as well, because sometimes they've only worked on games, but they're good at capturing a certain emotion that you want. Like, oh, they make really amazing, emotional, grandiose melodies, and I want something like that.
Yeah,
You know?
and I also say that's where it comes into like hearing their previous work and seeing what they sound like, because some games will have very like techno-y kind of music, and if you don't want that in your film, well, is that composer going to be able to change their sound? Even if you like their techno music from their project, are they going to be able to do something more with strings and drums and whatever else that's not going to be as like future sounding? So those are things to take into account when you're trying to look for one too.
Nowadays, video games they're going more on the narrative side nowadays, but and they're starting to integrate. So a lot of games are actually going to cinema composers and bringing them in versus the other way around. You're rarely going to see a video game composer, a true video game composer, like try to do a film. Like he's already found his role. It's pretty much the other way around. Like video games are going to cinema composers saying, like the game The Last of Us. I'll put that one on. That had a beautiful composition done with it. And then you have Kingdom Hearts, which is more of a Disney composition. So video games, I see what you guys are saying when you're talking about, like, you got games like Street Fighter and stuff like that. But nowadays games are becoming more and more cinematic and narrative.
That's definitely a good.
But when it comes to like finding different composers and a composer changing up a style, that's really up to you to decide like what, like you guys had mentioned something about like seeing his or listening to his work and just knowing, because a composer at the end of the day is just like another director. So it's a style that they're going with. You kind of have to pick your style. Like I worked with a composer once, and it was just like a cheap, small budget composer guy. And I don't know, I expected way too much from him. Like I gave him an example and I told him what I was going. I was like, yeah, I want 80s style. I want The Weapon. I want Die Hard and stuff like that. And then I told him, I was like, I really like the saxophone. Like I want a saxophone in the thing. And the thing, he didn't come back and tell me that like he was doing all of this off of like a keyboard. So like he tried to mimic a saxophone with the it was horrible.
Yeah.
And I was
Right.
like, I didn't know. So it's good to know what their capabilities are. Like if their whole thing is like, oh, I have this keyboard here, and that's what I use.
And
then
ask questions. Don't be afraid to like ask them questions, because they're not going to tell you everything, and sometimes they won't think about stuff that you're thinking about for your film, because they're focused on music. So be free to ask.
There's one, like you have the big orchestra. Of course, that's probably going to be the most expensive. And then you have the lower budget ones, and then the ones that aren't so lower budget, but still like they have just different style. Like you have jazz musicians, but if that's the style of your film, you want a more jazzy film, you would want to go with a jazz composer. But if you wanted it more like classical feel, you would want to go with the and it doesn't necessarily mean like when you go classical that you're going to have some guy with a whole orchestra or anything like that. You could still get like a classical feel with just a few instruments. It's just, it all depends on the artist of the style. At the end of the day, it's another art form, and that's the problem with it. And you have to understand like how that works and what it is that you want. If you want horror, you might want to go with the guy that works with keyboards a lot, because that's a lot of horror film stuff. Like if you watch the Friday the 13th, That's all keyboard. Or Michael Myers, which the Halloween movies. That's all keyboard. That's it. Maybe a little yeah, that's it. Like it's just keyboards. So it's really up to you to decide, like, well, one, what genre am I going with? And then two, like, do I want something with a lot of instruments in it? Or do I need something more subtle and I could just get away with a keyboard, or I can get away with a violin, or maybe just a trumpet or a saxophone or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Knowing that different instruments can also evoke emotions or different tones. Like,
Oh yeah, they
always-
said watching films and just like studying their music, like what kind of music, what kind of instruments are they using? Is it string instruments?
and he made
Is
it very clear. Don't just like listen to music in the background while you cook or clean or whatever. Sit down, listen to the kind of music you like, the kind of soundtracks and scores that you like. Listen to what instruments they have. Listen to what compilation instruments they have, and see what you like and what you don't, and what you want and what you don't.
Yeah. And also, just like with watching films, you can see what, like Brian was just talking about, you can start noticing, oh, they only used keyboard in this film, or this horror film, they used a lot of strings, and the strings were, like revving up every time it got very intense, or they use drums a lot in this, or you'll start to see all the different kinds of instruments that are used in different films and different genres, and which ones are used most often and which ones aren't. And then you might start getting ideas of what you think might work differently, or unique. Like, oh, a lot of horror films use strings and the keyboard, but I want to use this. And then you can kind of see if that would even work and how that would work. And you'll start to understand a little bit better if you just like go study it and like pay attention to all the different things going on, all the different musical instruments and the musical notes and keys and everything that's happening in that scene. So you can see, or in that genre of movie even, so you can see like what's used most often and what works and what doesn't in your eyes, your ears, I guess. But that actually brings up another thing we were talking about, like the individual people, and like it's another artist that you're bringing in. This is why it's very good. It's another relationship that you need to develop, that you need to see. This is why a lot of composers that work on people's projects, they also are the ones who get rehired for another project if they liked working with them. Because once you can sort of like, you know that you can work with this person, you know that they get you and you understand what you're going for, you get to go back and do it again and again. All the Star Wars movies, for instance, there's all, what's that guy's name? John Williams. All John Williams, because they liked him a lot. They liked what he did. And so that was one of the things that the director, George Lucas, said was like one of his favorite parts of that first movie, because he was under so much stress and everybody was saying it was going to suck. Once he heard that soundtrack, that was like one of the first things that he thought was that blew him away with how good it was compared to everything else that felt like it was like falling through the cracks and messing up and not going the way he wanted. That was the one thing that he immediately right off the bat liked. And so John Williams, he ended up getting pretty much every single Star Wars movie out there. He was the composer on for most of them, just because George Lucas knew he could work with him. He knew he liked his sound. He knew he liked the way he made the music. And so he was rehired, and that usually happens a lot. So you want to make sure that you can find someone you can work with. This is why I like meeting up with people beforehand, before you hire them, if you're able to meet up, and maybe like go over a business lunch or something, or just have a Zoom call or something like that, face to face, seeing what they look like and talking to them and seeing how they react to things, coming up with ideas even about the story and like what kind of music might work, just to see how you might be able to work together, what that relationship is going to be like. I mean, are they going to get prickly when you try to make suggestions that are different from their own? Do they feel like they quote unquote know better than you? Do you get nervous and sweaty when they try to make suggestions? Like, are they trying to make suggestions that are way off the out of left field that has nothing to do with your movie? And even though you've discussed the movie, are they trying to come up with new ideas all the time, or are they trying to just work with you and get what you want? In the end, it's the director's final choice. So just be sure that you can work with someone that works with you and that there's that mutual understanding. And that way, when you work with them, you have a better understanding of, you know, how that relationship works and how you're going to work together. Because certain people just don't work together well, even if they're both really good at their craft, even if they're both amazing. You've had big, huge Hollywood budget films. People, you know, the directors hate the actors hate the director, hate the cinematographer hates the director, composers hate the director. Different people hate different people because it's just different personalities clashing that don't meld well together. And that's why you see these people that just keep working with the same people, because they like it. They know that they can work well with them, and they know that they can get what they want without it being a huge fuss and a huge fight and whatever else. So before you even go getting that composer, you just want to kind of have some kind of call with them, have some kind of chat about the movie, something, so that you can understand what they're initially going for and how they're going to react if you need to direct them or make adjustments, and how you're going to react if they're trying to, like, how you'll see how many ideas they come up with, how eager they are, or how much they're trying to change what you initially talked about. And so those are things you really want to keep in mind. That's for any job, any role. You always want to just kind of see if you can work together, because you don't have to love them, you don't have to be best friends, but you have to be able to work well together.
Yeah, I have something to add. On the prickly note, sometimes it's actually good. Like, it's nice when you get to work with people that are super smooth and easy, but it's also nice to be able to have the ability to work with people that are a little bit more
Defensive
or prickly. It's a different subtype of.
No, I definitely understand what you're going for, Sarah, because it's like, you shouldn't just be able to work with people that are easy. You should be able to be like, you know what, this is a job, I have to do it. And if there's someone in my team that isn't the easiest to work with, or isn't someone I particularly love, but they're in my team and I have to work with them anyway, I'm not going to like, oh no, I'm not going to work with you. Because if you need to work together, you need to learn how to work with people that you might not 100% agree with or get along.
Give it my best go. And I say prickly because, like, I myself am slightly prickly at times. I admit that. It's a weird thing where it's just certain people, like, it comes down to like what your life experience, or like who you are, like your personality a little bit and your life experience mixed together. Where people, like, they could be really nice, but like, it's just, or like you're talking to somebody who knows those stuff and they're not trying to be like, you don't know what you're doing, but they're just like, you just don't get
it just kind of comes off that way. I know exactly what you're talking
comes
about.
off that way. So you're like, I don't know how to, and you're like trying to explain it, but it's like actually a really complex system that you're trying to.
Like that, when he is on set, he is a lot pricklier. He is a lot more like,
He gets in like a work mode, and a lot of people do that. Like they set, like they're fine and they're friendly and everything, but then when they get into that work mode,
happy,
it's like they're all business. So
yeah, and so James is not all business, because like he does get distracted a lot too, but he is also like he's such a good, not in the moment, like in the moment he is amazing, but like in between takes he'll get easily distracted sometimes, but he's like really good at what he does, but he's in this work mode to where sometimes he'll like snap at you a little bit, or he'll be a little rude, and he's not trying to be. He doesn't even notice he does it. Like, he was like, what? Oh, I didn't even know. But because he's on work mode, he'll just be a little more short. And he's not trying to be a like mean or rude or a dick or anything. He's just focused on his craft. And
I
sometimes
enjoy that.
For people that don't know him, it might come across as like, wow, he's a jerk or whatever. Hopefully not all the time, but like in that moment I was like, James, are you okay? I was kind of scared because I was used to him being like joking and whatever, and so when he was like serious mode, I was like, oh god, I'm scared. But yeah, so some people are different when they're doing a job. They're more professional, their mindset's different, their behavior is different, and that's why I always say never take it personally. You're there to do a job, be as professional as possible. If the person's being difficult or being a little less polite than you would like, or a little more standoffish or prickly, and just don't take it personally and keep doing your job, keep being polite, because you're there to do your job and you're all there to do a job. So at the end of the day, that shouldn't affect you. You're supposed to be focusing on your job, not what they're doing.
All right, I'll add to what you guys are saying, and I'll say that yes, okay, so if the composer is prickly about something, and then it turns out maybe they are right, and that's why they're defending this thing, and they're not trying to take what you have because they have a better idea and it actually works better.
Oh
But-
yeah, take it into consideration. Don't assume that they're being a jerk either.
But when you're first getting with a composer and you're just talking about initial ideas, you usually do not want to see too much pushback yet, because you need to be able to make sure that they're going to understand and go with what you want. If they're pushing back already in the initial, they might not even want to go with what you want. And they might not put in as much effort to do what you want, even though you're trying to get it that way. So you need to make sure you can work with these people and that they are going to understand that if you make the call, even if they disagree with it 100%, they are still going to go with it and give it their all to make it what you want, because that is their job. And so like that is why cinematographers, directors, composers, they all need to have like the mutual understanding with the director. They push back definitely especially when they're defending something. Script supervisors, of course, if they feel like something they don't want this continuity thing to be ruined, and the director's like, who cares? But they're like, no, this is going to mess up the film. Do not have that happen. And they fight back and they're a little prickly about it. That's good. But if the director just goes, well, we're going with this, and they're still not having it, that becomes an issue. And that's why you have to work with people that have that mutual understanding. And not just that, but also once the director says something, if you can understand it right away because you've worked with them, you guys understand exactly what you're going for, then it makes it a lot easier, faster, and more efficient, which is also a good thing. So that's why initially you want to make sure that this composer is going to be able to work with you. You can explain stuff, you can start to understand them, and they can start to understand you. But are they gonna work with you? Are they gonna take your ideas into account? Are they saying stuff that's making you feel nervous and weird because that's nothing like how the story is? And even though you've started to explain that, they're still pushback and saying, no, I want it. I'm really sure that these drums is going to work right there. Just trust me on this. And you really don't think that's going to work. That can be an issue. They might be right. But initially speaking, you want to get somebody that's going to, you want to develop that relationship to be able to work with somebody and not just have them work against you.
Yeah.
I feel like what Sarah's talking about, like in a general sense, when you don't have a choice and you're working with people that you can't really control who you're working with.
No, that's after the fact. I'm talking about when you're trying to hire somebody.
No, definitely.
Especially a composer, because that's post-production. You're just trying to get them, need them to understand and to work well with you. If they don't work well, it's going to make it a very more straining experience, and it's going to be very annoying trying to get it right. And they might not even make what you want. So, and that's going to be something that you take on yourself and like, dang it, I felt like I shouldn't have hired them at the beginning because of that, but I trusted that they were good and I did. And they did something I didn't want, and now they're not going to change.
And that's something that the guy said too. Like, even if you like the person as a person and you think they're cool and everything, that doesn't mean you'll work well together. That doesn't mean they have what you're looking for, what you want. And that was something that he touched on a lot. And you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with saying no, like, to the person. They're a cool person and everything, but you can't, like, it's just not going to work for the project you want at the end of the day.
And now if you're already on set with people and you already hired them and you're going through these things, then some pushback's good. It makes you think, it makes you have to come up with a reason to either go with it or not go with it. So it actually is good. But as long as it's not happening constantly where it's, taking up production time, because that is very essential. But if it's happening every so often on certain things, then it's always good to have some.
I feel like we were, when we started our shoot, we were kind of like, I wonder how Coda and James are going to work together, because James is used to having to do all of his own stuff, and like, of course he's worked on other productions too, but we've never worked together, so we didn't know if we'd have that synergy. I was really happy in seeing it because yes, he was very like, sometimes he would take over without even thinking about it because he's just used to it. But he would also, like, when Coda said, no, I want to do this, he would give a little pushback because that's what he thought. He gave his opinion as a cinematographer, as he should. But at the end of the day, he respected when Coda was like, no, I'm going with this. This is what I'm doing. He's like, okay, and that's what you need at the end of the day, someone who will give you suggestions, but who will be willing to work with you and understand that at the end of the day, it's your call, and it's what's best for the overall production and what goes together. And you might disagree, but at the end of the day, you need to not only respect that, but be willing to work with the person on that. Because sometimes the person will be like, yeah, okay, fine, but they'll put less effort into it because it's not what they wanted. Like, they might not even notice it. It might be a subconscious thing, but they will, okay, fine, we're not doing what I want. Well, I'll just half-ass it, or I'll just like put less effort into it because I'm not as passionate about it. This isn't something I want as much. I'm doing it for them and not for me or whatever. So that's also something to keep in mind, and to like see if you're noticing, if they're doing it, if they're putting as much effort in, as much work into it, is as if it were their idea, as if it were the plan that they wanted, or if not. Does that make sense?
So that's why it's always important to like do these, these initial meetups with the people, or having a conversation with them at first. People like the composer, the DP, stuff like that. If you're working with someone you've never worked with before, it's always good to at least get a sense of where their head's at for the project, so that you can kind of see if you're even able to work together with them or not.
And you, as the other person, don't completely discount their ideas, because there are times when the person gives you an idea and you're like, nope, this is what I have, because you have this specific thing in your mind. You've been thinking about it so much. But sometimes their input can make a huge difference, and you can be like, oh, wow, I never saw through this perspective before. I never thought about it like this. And that's why it's so cool, like, when we were going through the dynamic of the director and the cinematographer, because they're supposed to be a team, but they both have things to contribute. And
I agree with that. It's
different idea. And so the sound, your composer, sometimes they'll want to show you something that you never thought of, that you never thought would work, but then you're like, holy cow, that works, and that it matches so well. I never thought it would,
Right.
So give them that chance as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And you want to see and you want somebody who's also passionate about it, which is another thing you can see at the beginning, if they're giving any effort into that beginning conversation about, what they think might work, if they're having ideas, or if they're just kind of like, I don't know, then you kind of see like where their head's at, and if they're going to be as passionate and into it, because people that are more passionate about it are going to work harder at it without even realizing it. And so you always want more passionate people if you can. More passionate people about the project, especially if they like your project. The composer's going to see your whole story, and they're going to be helping that story flow better, or helping it, those emotions come across with their music. And so them liking the project and wanting to take part in it is a big thing, because they're going to be really elevating it to the next level. So when you're getting a composer, I'm not sure how true this is now, like for each location. I'm sure the areas change the rates, but a general rate that the people were giving was a new composer might charge around $100 for a minute of screen time. So if you have a 9-minute project, it'd be about $900 maybe for them to compose it. Whereas a professional, they might charge around $1,000 a minute of screen time. And then they said that $250 per minute of screen time is fairly standard. So if that's true, then it'd be about, for a 5-minute project, it'd be about
also take into consideration that article was LA rates, so it could vary very much between state,
could be a lot lower depending on where you are. It could be higher depending on where you are. And also if they're like doing an orchestra or something, then obviously it's going to be more expensive, because it's going to be more people, not just them.
Or if it's just a basic melody, yeah.
If they're doing it digitally, like this guy on the screen, then it'll be him and charging whatever rate he wants to charge. Some composers prefer to charge based on the hours they work instead of the number of minutes of music they produce. So that's also something. And of course, everybody's rates are going to be different anyway, because everybody sets themselves at a different pay scale. So they're all going to charge different. And most composers are flexible on their rates to an extent, especially if they like you and your project. Then they're going to be more willing to work with you and come to an agreement. And that's with everybody as well. Like if they like you, if they like your personality, and they also like your project, they're more willing to take a lower rate or to work with you if you can't afford it, to go lower so that they can be on your project since they like it and they like you. So that's another reason why it's important to talk to those people beforehand and really get those ideas and talk about it and show how passionate you are about the project, so that they see that it's not just something you're doing because you, I don't know, as like a side project, but it's something you're passionate about. And that'll give them more of a reason to kind of come to an agreement with you if you can't afford a huge budget, if you're doing lower budget stuff, especially if you have a really good story and you can discuss that with them. You're discussing the story with them in that initial conversation, so that you can see if they can work with you to bring the music into that story and make it flow. So it's always good to talk to them, to get that relationship developing and see if you can work with them, and then see if they're able to work with you on whatever budget you have available at that time for that project. Does anybody have any questions or comments about composers? Brian, how did your composer work out? Did he make the music? Was it good?
Yeah.
No, it was terrible. It was pretty bad. So what I do is like I get an idea in my head on how I want the movie to look, and I shoot it and I get it to look a certain way, and I'll think, oh, this looks a lot like for this particular movie, it came out looking like Lethal Weapon. So I took a lot of the scores from Lethal Weapon and I merged them in. So like you were saying, like every score is like custom to a certain movie, but it just so happens like sometimes, a lot of times, like another score could work really good with your movie as well. I'm talking about like, certain things like the character gets shocked and there's like a weird little chime or something in there. And that could also work for your film as well. So I showed it to him. I said, this is the kind of the tone that I want. And I didn't tell him, like you guys were mentioning, like you don't want to tell him you want, this, that, or, this, that, and the other. I pretty much told him, I was like, I want like 80s, vibe, kind of 80s action movie type thing. And I was like, I really like the saxophone in Lethal Weapon. And I was like, if I can just get like a saxophone in there. But I didn't talk to him about, I really should have, but I never really talked to him about his capabilities and what he was capable of. And he just kind of just went with it. And he came back and he had this saxophone. And I was like, oh, I'll just take the saxophone out. And it was still bad. It was only like, he only charged like $100. So like I couldn't complain. So like I took it. He was really proud of it. So yeah, like I gave him a copy of it and I was like, yeah, you do whatever you want with it. But I never I never did anything with it.
Yeah. Hey mom, look at this film I made. I'm just kidding. I mean, that happens all the time.
Yeah. No, I actually was watching a video of one of the YouTubers I followed. She's an actress in LA. And she was a child actor. So she was a kid and then she grew up and then now she does YouTube full time because she loves it. She's actually really good with finance and that's why I watch it. But she was talking about how the biggest production she's ever done when she was like 15 and she was there for like a month and she didn't graduate and she had to do like summer school for her junior year even though she was doing school on set, but apparently those points didn't count. So she actually had to redo it to be on that set for 1 month. And it was like the biggest project for like this big movie. I forgot what it was, but it was about this football star or whatever. And she was like super proud of it. She was like in a bunch of the scenes and it was like her biggest project yet. And then once the thing actually came out, in the edit, they decided they wanted it to be a lot more about the sport and less about the family. And so there were barely any scenes with her in it. She shot like a bunch of scenes, and then there were like 2 or 3 scenes with her in it, and like I don't think she even got any dialogue. It was just like scenes of the family watching the game on TV, the family being in the stadium, and stuff like that. And she had to go to like press junkets and like interviews and stuff. And she was like, please don't ask me. Like, I was barely in this thing at the end of the day. Even though she shot a bunch of shots for it, she's like super excited about it when she actually went to watch it. She was in like 3 scenes where she didn't like just like a camera panning over, and that's it. Gosh, that must suck. Sucks so bad. They cut all of your scenes out, pretty much.
Yeah, but it happens, and it happens because story takes precedent over everything else, and if it's not working, then you just got to kick it out. Like the music's not working, then kick it out. Sorry, composer, it just didn't work. So
Yeah,
you just got to do what's best for the story. At the end of the day,
I mean,
sucks
yeah,
for the people, but
that's the story. That's the story a lot of actors would tell you. Like I know a couple actors who did House of Cards, and yeah, we had these speaking lines, but then when I saw the show, they cut it all out. I was like, oh, I mean that happened.
yeah.
At the end of the day, it's if that happens and you put in a lot of work, that would be absolutely infuriating. But there's absolutely nothing you can do, and life is filled with absolutely infuriating.
yeah. I mean, she said it was still a fun experience at the end of the day, and she was more embarrassed of the fact that she still had to do press junkets because she was one of the. She was set to be one of the main actors. She even had her like own her own lot. No, gosh, I forgot the RV thing. Her own set
Trailer.
whatever trailer. Thank you. Gosh, why didn't I remember the word trailer? She even had her own trailer and everything, and she was barely in the movie yet she still had to do press junkets for it. So that was the most awkward part for her, was the fact that like, okay, I understand at the end of the day, like that's just part of the job. Like sometimes the story changes in the edit, but it was way embarrassing because they kept asking her all these questions about the movie and her part in it and stuff. And she was like in 3 scenes. And so she just felt really embarrassed having to be a part of the press junkets and stuff for it.
Yeah.
What was she going to say?
But that's why, like, even if you're in a film, you should just wait on telling people until you're ready to show. Oh, my stuff stayed in. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, anyway, let's wrap up. So for Thursday, we're going to be talking about lighting a night scene, editing sound, and sound mixing. And those are the 2 things. So it might be a quick one. We'll see. But those are the only 2 subjects we're going to be talking about on Thursday. And then just a reminder that the lighting mimic the screenshot where we're trying to mimic the lighting style and the lighting color and all of that from Blade Runner 2049?
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be due on December 9th. We're taking one of those screenshots in that email I sent out to everybody, and we're trying to copy it with our own lighting and our own setups, however we can, getting creative with it. If we don't have, of course, we don't have the same equipment they did. So we got to get creative and try to see how close we can get it with what we have available and how we would go about doing that. And then also the Foley exercise is going to be due on December 9th as well, where you're just taking a clip of something you've done or something that like another movie or something, and just taking a clip, taking out all the sound, and then just adding in your own sound effects for all the sound effect, wherever the sound effect should be. So those are 2 exercises due December 9th, which is not this Thursday, but next Thursday.
Okay.
All right. And
Sounds
that's
good.
it, everybody.
So to end it, I was just gonna like when we were talking about misunderstandings and Brian was talking about like the whole people were
Record
thinking
this or
that.
no?
Oh no. Unless you